Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo, ba ba. Who's the man who will speak the truth? Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo, ba ba. Lone candles that burn. Who's the man who will bring light into your life? Boo, ba ba, ba ba ba, boo. Ba ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who digs through human excrement to present you the gems? Boo, ba ba, ba boo, ba boo, ba ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who kinda sometimes knows what he's talking about? Boo, ba ba, ba ba da, boo. Ba ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who has a scatterbrain, low IQ, and weak memory recall? Boo, ba ba, ba ba da, boo. Ba ba, lone candles that burn. Who's the man who plays games and complains that he sucks at them? Boo, ba ba, ba ba da, boo, ba ba, lone candles that burn. Who? Hello and welcome to Lone Candle Live. This is another episode of ReplyGuying with Lone Candle, where I discuss me replying to other people and talking about random stuff with random people on the internet. All right. Okay. Well, let's get going. So, today we're discussing COVID. I had many replies for this particular video, and some of them had replies to me. So, wait, am I reply guying, or is this segment really me talking to reply guys, since I'm never talking to original poster, or very rarely? All right, so this New York Times guy is one of the few conservatives on the New York Times interviewed a guy talking about COVID, and I had some comments. So first I said the vaccine was most important for older people, but younger people died from the disease too. And the vaccine also reduced their chance of dying. So there's a lot of discussion on COVID where people go, oh, yeah, I mean, all these interventions were unnecessary because, only old people were at risk. And that's just not true. Old people certainly were at much greater risk, and that's true and important for determining what you should do about it. But a lot of middle-aged people and even younger people died too. Yes, their chance of dying, the chance of an individual middle-aged or younger person of dying when they got COVID was really low. But the disease was really infectious. That's a big problem with COVID, is it's really infectious, so a lot of people got it. So even a small percentage die. Well, because a lot of people got it, that still adds up to a lot of people dying. And so we should not just poo-poo or dismiss younger people or middle-aged people dying, because although their chance of dying when they get it is low, a lot of them get it, so it still adds up. But also, we also need to remember, yes, old people were the most vulnerable, and people with conditions that made them already vulnerable, health conditions already. All right, next comment. Yes, all our liberties only exist as long as there isn't a legitimate and threatening emergency to justify limiting them. The problem is, when there is a massive threat to lots of people's lives, limiting our liberties is justified, and we'd be fools not to limit liberties in such cases as when fighting a massive war or when under threat by a deadly pandemic. These are real threats to liberties, and governments can misuse them or exaggerate threats. But you also don't have any liberties when you're dead or conquered. Unless you were liberated. So, if the U.S. conquers you, you have even more liberties because we liberated you. But anyways, yeah, there's a real serious tension here. On one hand, leaders around the world, especially in authoritarian countries, but also in democracies that are, when leaders are trying to push their power or even end democracy, they will use emergencies as an excuse. They will use things out there that are scary and could kill you as an excuse to limit your liberties. And you must be very vigilant and careful to not let leaders unjustly limit your leaders because they got you scared. But the world's not that simple, because at the same time, there are actual threats out there. And some of those threats are very large, and if big enough, and if it's in a situation where, limiting liberties is going to save a lot of lives or stave off a larger threat, well, then the limiting of your liberties, hopefully temporarily, is actually justified. And so we can't just dismiss any attempt to limit liberties because of a fear as fear-mongering, because it might not actually be fear-mongering. If you have a infectious and deadly disease, and in order to greatly limit deaths, we need to stay locked down, that could be justified. If you have a vaccine that not only stops you from dying of a disease, but stops others from dying of disease, well, then it could be justified to force you to take it. Because by you not taking it, you're going to infect someone else and get someone killed. And because of how diseases work, it could work out where, you infect that person. You affect one person or maybe 3 people, or not that many directly, or many directly, but you could not infect that many directly, but then they go and infect a bunch of other people. So by you continuing the chain of infection, you could kill millions of people easily. And so that could be justified to force you to get the vaccine. Now, just to be clear, this was not the COVID vaccine. We knew very early on the evidence for the COVID vaccine showed that while it did a good job at preventing you from dying and greatly reducing the chance that you'll be hospitalized, it didn't stop you from spreading it to others. Some vaccines with some diseases do that and some don't. I don't know exactly why. Depends on the nature of the disease, the nature of the vaccine. We didn't know in the beginning whether COVID would do that. Certainly, I think some public officials made a mistake of acting like the COVID vaccine would protect others when you got it. We knew pretty early on that that wasn't the case, or that there wasn't evidence there. And my understanding, that's still where the evidence lies. So the vaccine was great in protecting yourself, but not others. But just because the COVID vaccine work like this doesn't mean others won't it. And of course, the other big example where you might need to limit liberties is if there is a massive invasion or a threat of invasion from a much more evil people or government. Well, we might have to limit your liberties in order to fight that, and that actually could be justified. So there's a real tension here. And a lot of times when people talk about this, they act like, any fear-mongering is just fear-mongering, when there's actually a real serious tension where we actually need to be ready to limit our liberties in certain cases. We just need to be vigilant that they actually are good cases. It's a real tough tension and requires real-time information to even know what the correct answer is. Anyways. All right, another comment I had was, he really wants to focus on why people made the decisions they did, but his explanations for why are baseless conspiracy theories without evidence. So the person being interviewed, when talking about officials' responses to COVID, he really wanted to talk, rather than talk about the details of science, which should be his expertise, he really just wants to talk about why people did what they did. But then when he describes what they did, it's a freaking conspiracy theory that are not based on the actual evidence. It's just speculation on his part. And, that's not cool. Mr. Boo Bear B2J said there are plenty emails to show why certain decisions were made. Stop being willfully blind. To which I said, no, there are not. Multiple people were making decisions and trying to determine why these people did certain things from different emails. Multiple people were making decisions and trying to determine why these people did certain things from different emails is difficult. They don't support the big claims the guest is making. He's speculating about people's motives, and the emails don't clear that up. So I'm not saying the emails are completely useless, but the guest was making giant claims that are not supported by the emails. It really were speculation, and I think Boo Bear is just assuming that the emails say what he wants them to say, but they don't. The emails do not make clear that people were concerned about gain-of-function research. Oh, I misspoke. The emails do make clear that people were concerned about gain-of-function research and worried that they could have led to the virus. but they don't make clear that people made decisions based on covering their asses rather than based on what they thought was the best for public health while dealing with a new virus they didn't fully understand. So yeah, you could see people worried about, oh man, was our gain of function research called the virus? Uh-oh. But it's a jump and then to conclude, oh, well, that means anything they did was just to cover their ass. And I don't think we know that for most of the people. And the doctor was just making big jumps of claims, the person who was interviewed. Which, of course, is not cool. We shouldn't be accusing people of things without proper evidence. And, of course, he acts like the evidence is just there. And people like Boo Bear believe him and then call me blind when actually they're blind in just believing the emails say that when they don't. Okay. Another comment I had here. The problem with focusing on protecting older people is that if younger people can go out and catch the disease, they will bring it to the older people. So, of course, I don't remember exactly what I was responding to, but I kind of mentioned this. Oh, I did mention this earlier. But yeah, so earlier I mentioned that, well, younger people were still dying. Yes, not nearly the same rate, but it's so infectious, younger people were still dying. But another issue is that younger people can spread it to older people. So we need to remember, oh yeah, younger people just do what the hell you want. Well, even if they weren't dying at all from it, well, no, because when they go out and about, they're going to catch it and give it to older people. So that's still a real problem. And we are protecting older people by making sure younger people aren't getting it and giving it to older people. And yeah. And in this case, that's because younger people were less vulnerable and older people more vulnerable. But it could be any group of people if one, for some reason, is more vulnerable to the disease and others are less vulnerable. Unless it's one that can't be spread easily. But unfortunately, COVID is one that's spread very easily. All right. So then I said, another comment. Yeah, I just listen to these videos and I comment a storm for the 0 people who read it. Anyways, his idea that people chose remedies to COVID to cover their asses over gain of function is pure speculation. Where are the leaks of people discussing their motives? We'd likely have that by now if this was the case, because we are talking about a diverse set of people, and someone would have screwed up like that by now. And so I'm saying he's making all these claims about people's motives, but you know what? If that really was like clearly their motives, we would probably know, because a whole bunch of people during COVID were discussing these things and someone would have leaked, you know? And so I think we'd know it if that was their motive. And so that makes his speculative claims even more doubtful. Okay. He says we want to have a scientific discussion, but then he explicitly said he supports the lab leak theory, not based on actual science. As the science on where COVID came from evolved, it centered on natural origins from wet markets, not from a lab. It seems like he really wants to be a lab leak, so his theory about how people reacted will be correct, but hasn't dealt with where the evidence on the question of where it came from has actually led. Yeah, so the guy being interviewed in here says, oh, I want to have a scientific discussion. And then when he goes to talk about the origin of the lab leak, all he does is talk about how people responded rather than digging into the science of, well, what do we know about where it started? That's how you figure out where it originated, not where it started, not just by speculating about how people responded. Did he even take the time to do that? Doesn't seem like he did. So this guest is kind of a jackass if that's the case. But anyways, and, you know, I've looked into this. I'm no expert, but it seems to me like they've actually figured it out. I mean, maybe it's a Chinese conspiracy. You know, maybe the Chinese have tricked the scientists who are real specialists and have tricked them into thinking it's a lab market it's a wet market so that people don't think it's a lab, which, you know, I suppose that's possible, you know. But assuming it's not something like that, they've actually kind of figured it out. And the evidence is pointing towards wet market, not lab. Now, this confuses a lot of people because there was a bit of a story of how this all came out. Early on in COVID, the media really talked about the wet market. And remember there's a letter signed by different people in science saying, yeah, we think it's a wet market. And you didn't hear from the lab market people, the lab market specialists. I don't know if that was just a media bias or if they weren't putting it out there, or maybe because Trump said that, they didn't want to put themselves out there because it makes them look pro-Trump or something. I don't know. But for whatever reason, it is true. We had whether it was more the media's fault or actually the scientists themselves' fault as far as getting the word out there, it was all about the wet market. and not about the lab leak theory. And then later it was revealed actually the lab leak theory is at least as plausible as the wet market. And it's like, oh my God, wow, we got to really keep it in mind about things, don't we? And so a lot of people remember that, and then that's why they now think, oh yeah, it was a lab leak. But, well, the science didn't end there. The gathering of evidence and the studying of trying to figure out where COVID started didn't end there. And, well, they kept looking into it, and now, most, if not all the specialists who really, it's their specialty and have looked into it, they've really narrowed it down, and it's a wet market. It started in the wet market, not the lab. That's where it really looks. They could even narrow it down to the specific stall, like animal stall it came from. And so with the pattern of how COVID started, to believe it's a lab leak, you would have to think that the guy who exited the lab with COVID went straight to this wet market, didn't go anywhere else, didn't stop anywhere else to also spread it, somehow didn't also spread it to his family, whoever lived near him, but only spread it to this wet market and nowhere else, to make it look like it started at the wet market, which is really highly unlikely, because when they follow the origin, well, it started at the wet market. So maybe future evidence will change that. It sounds like they really figured that out. And even initial scientists who came out and said, hey, lab leak is actually very plausible. I actually lean towards lab leak. Many of them had seen the evidence and said, oh, actually, yeah, no, I'm back towards the other. There was a famous congressional video where I don't remember if it was Senate or House, but for a hearing, a Republican brought a guy on just because he was going to say lab leak did it. But that guy, in between agreeing to go on in the actual hearing, well, he saw the more evidence and he changed his mind. And of course, the Republican representative or senator, whichever one it was just like, lambasting him, saying he's a liar, and then saying he should have told me, you should have told me that you changed the evidence, which I don't know if he should have or not, but it's like, dude, he's a scientist, man. And it was a new ongoing thing, of people figuring out COVID. So more data came in and was analyzed, and he saw it, and he changed his mind, and now thought it was more likely it's a wet market. So anyways, my understanding is that the evidence points towards wet market, and a lot of people don't realize that, and probably don't even believe me saying it right now. I'm not the best person to explain the details of that, but I have posted 2 links in the description of Facebook, YouTube, and in the Twitch stream. I have 2 links, YouTube videos that explain that. So if you're actually interested in hearing about kind of more of the science and also how this story evolved, both of those do a pretty good job of that about it. The longer one, the guy's kind of a dick, but I think he does a good job describing it. And of course, you could always do your own research on top of that. These are just YouTube videos, but I feel like they're pretty good. So if you want to actually hear why, which I'm not the best person to tell you, gotta admit, why we know it's a wet market, check out those links. But anyways, we got Boo Bear again, same guy, commenting on 2 of my comments, says, ridiculous that you would think it had zoonotic origin. Forgive me for not knowing how to pronounce words. It should be easy to provide evidence if it was. First of all, they have provided evidence, so it's like he just hasn't done his basic homework. And calls me ridiculous. Fuck you. Just kidding. You also ignore all the emails that showed Fauci and friends were hiding the truth about their involvement in creating the virus. Your political beliefs are clouding your ability to be rational. Okay, so I said it never said it had to be anything. He said it had. Well, I didn't say it had to be anything. I said it's where the pointed was. I said that's where the evidence pointed. This is just, he's creating a straw man of what I actually said. That's not cool. Talk to me about what I actually said and claimed and believed, not about you exaggerating my position. Fuck you. Anyways, it didn't have to be anything, but that is where the evidence is now pointing. They've traced its origins to a specific market. What do you mean? It should be easy to provide. The evidence was provided. Did you not look, dude? Obviously not. You'd have to believe that the doctors from the Wuhan lab left infected and went to that market and nowhere else, so that they only spread their lab COVID at that wet market. Okay, it took time for specialists to trace this. So it must not have been that easy, because you said it was easy, but it took time. So obviously it wasn't that easy. Even if some that liked the lab theory at first have been convinced by the evidence. Oh, and I'm saying even some that like the lab theory at first have been convinced by the evidence. But here by some, I mean like specialists in the area, because it's just sort of complicated. I've seen people explain it. I'm like, okay, yeah, they're following genetics and where it was and stuff. But, I don't understand the details. At some point, you I can't be an expert in everything. So at some point, you have no choice but to at least lean towards the expert and got to strike the right balance between blindly believing them and just go, oh, I don't want to believe that because it feels bad to me, when it's a complicated thing and you're never going to know what it's talking about. Maybe because you're dumb, but even if you're not dumb, because the world's complicated and you can't be an expert in most things, Anyways, you got to show a little humility yourself. Anyways, and I said no emails showed that Fauci created this particular virus. My understanding is Fauci did have emails and others concerned, oh crap, we did do gain and function research and talking about that, and because I believe he did fund it even to the Wuhan lab to try to figure out some gain of function stuff. But because the evidence doesn't toward it being a lab leak, that means Fauci didn't create it, so it had nothing to do with Fauci. And again, him being worried about it isn't the same as him doing a massive cover-up. But I'd have to relook into exactly what Fauci did there. All right, so that's all I had for you today. Ultimately, why I especially would want to talk about this is a lot of people don't realize that actually the scientists have really narrowed it down, and it really has, the evidence has come in over the months and years, and it points towards COVID being from a wet market, meaning not from a COVID lab leak. A lot of people are confused about that because at the beginning, the lab leak was underplayed in the media and even by the scientists themselves and maybe by politicians, and then it turned out actually that's a good theory. But science didn't end at that time, and then over time, no, the wet market wins out because they were able to pretty well isolate where it came from, it sounds like. Again, that's described in the links I provide. Those are videos not done by me, but they were good, and I'm happy to share other people's good work. All right, well, that was another episode of ReplyGuying with Lone Candle. Like me, comment me, love me, and stay humble, friends. Stay humble and stream.